35mm film is more expensive than it's ever been, so it's time to start thinking about more creative ways to save money shooting film. This is the Canon Demi EE-17, and these are the photos it can take. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Canon Demi cameras, they are a series of half-frame cameras put out by Canon in the 1960s. Half-frame's seen a big resurgence in the last couple years, but for those of you who don't know, a half-frame camera works by taking a photo half the size of a traditional 35mm camera, meaning you can squeeze twice as many exposures onto a single roll of film. Like many others, I first learnt about the half-frame format last summer when Kodak released the Ektar H35. However, I was a bit disappointed to learn that for £50, all you get is a fixed focus lens with a sluggish fixed 9.5 aperture and an all-plastic construction that no doubt won't stand the test of time. I picked up my Demi on the other hand for £90, and for the extra 40 quid, you get an all-metal construction, an extremely fast 30mm lens that ranges from f1.7 all the way down to f16, a variable shutter going from bulb up to 1/500th of a second, as well as a really reliable auto-exposure system. Now, as mentioned earlier, the main selling point of the Demi is that it shoots half frames, meaning you should get at least 72 shots out of a single roll of film. That said, given the Demi's quite compact width, I was actually able to get 76 shots out of my first roll. Of course, you may be thinking, surely by shooting half frames you lose some resolution in your final images, and this is true. I like to think of half frame as essentially shooting photos with a Super 35 size sensor, so you will end up with more pronounced grain and less detail than a full frame 35mm film camera. That said, I think the loss of detail has been exaggerated quite a lot, most likely due to cheaply made cameras like the H35 being people's primary reference point, and I was really surprised to see just how much detail I was able to get out of my images when properly exposed. There is still definitely a more vintage feel to a lot of the images I've shown so far, but for me that's sort of the whole point of shooting on film. If I wanted super sharp photos, I'd shoot digital. So now that I've talked about all the things I love about this camera, let's talk about some of the challenges when shooting with this thing. The most major one is that this camera is not an SLR and it doesn't have a rangefinder. This means focusing with this camera is done by looking at your subject, guessing how far away you think it is, and hoping for the best. It does have a viewfinder, however this is here solely for framing and won't give you any clues as to whether or not your subject is in focus. For landscapes at infinity or portraits at stop-down apertures, this shouldn't be too difficult to get right. However, if you're hoping to shoot close subjects with a wide open aperture, you are likely going to miss focus. Another annoying thing is although this camera can be operated completely manually, the aperture selector is a bit fiddly, and I could definitely see myself accidentally getting a big meaty fingerprint on the front element if not careful. It's worth mentioning though, I shot all the photos you're seeing in this video on auto exposure mode, so once again, I'd recommend just doing this for the most enjoyable experience. It's essentially shutter priority, so set your shutter speed and the camera will adjust the aperture automatically depending on light levels. Finally, I think it's worth mentioning that where this camera has made some concessions in its focusing and manual operation, in my opinion it more than makes up for this with its tiny form factor. This thing is tiny. With big enough trousers and a lens cap, you could even call this thing pocketable, although I like to stick mine in a little pouch. This combined with the almost silent shutter means that this camera is stealthy as hell, which is definitely an appeal to street photographers out there. Genuinely, this thing is so quiet, I got worried the shutter wasn't even opening. And although it's small, don't think that means it's built cheap. This thing has some real weight to it for its size, so it's no wonder it's still working after nearly 60 years. So there you have it, the Canon Demi EE-17. A camera that cuts your film costs in half, has fully manual controls, and is small enough to be an everyday carry. There are other Demi models other than the EE-17, however from what I've been able to gather, this was the best of the lot, so if you do decide to pick one up, make sure you pay attention to which model you're getting. Thanks for watching.